Sarah Beth clutched her fevered baby against her chest as her horse's hooves slipped on the canyon's crumbling edge. 1,000 feet of jagged rock yawned below them, and behind her, an entire town's children lay dying. The ancient map in her trembling hand was torn, blood-stained, and missing the final passage. But turning back now meant watching every child in Millbrook fade away while her baby girl held their salvation in her veins. I remember Sarah Beth Morgan at 23, widowed just 6 months after that mining accident took her husband. She sat beside her baby daughter's crib in their cramped cabin, watching little Emma's chest rise and fall with labored breathing. The fever had broken an hour ago. Outside, those church bells wouldn't stop tolling. Death had a schedule in Millbrook, and it ran like clockwork every morning. Emma stirred, her tiny fist uncurling as color returned to her pale cheeks. Sarah Beth pressed her palm against her daughter's forehead. Cool now. Finally cool. The relief should have flooded through her, but instead, dread settled in her stomach like a stone. Because Emma was getting better, and that made her different from every other child in town. The cholera had swept through Millbrook 2 weeks earlier like wildfire through dry grass. Military blockades sealed every road in and out. Nobody leaves, nobody enters. Those were the orders from the territorial government. Can't have the plague spreading to the bigger towns, right? Well, tell that to the parents burying their children in ground so frozen they had to use pickaxes. Dr. Hartford knocked on her door that afternoon, his medical bag looking more like a prop than actual equipment. The man meant well, but he was about as qualified to handle cholera as a chicken was to perform surgery. His eyes went wide when he saw Emma sitting up, trying to grab her wooden rattle. "She's eating?" he asked, watching Emma gum a piece of soft bread. "Started this morning," Sarah Beth said, "keeping everything down, too." Hartford examined Emma with shaking hands, listening to her lungs, checking her pulse. The realization hit him like a thunderbolt. This baby had fought off the disease that was killing children 3 times her age. Her blood might contain the antibodies that could save the others. But here's the problem. They needed a real doctor. Dr. Marcus Webb worked 60 miles away across Devil's Canyon, researching cholera treatments at a mining camp turned medical station. He was the only physician within 200 miles who might know how to turn Emma's recovery into medicine for the dying children. The military wouldn't budge on their quarantine orders, not for one theory, not for one baby, not for anything. The telegraph lines didn't cross the canyon, too expensive, too dangerous, too pointless for such empty land. Traditional routes through the checkpoints would take 4 days minimum, assuming they'd even let her pass. Time the children didn't have. Sarah Beth remembered Jake Morrison then, the old prospector who used to drink with her husband. Morrison claimed he'd found secret passages through Devil's Canyon, routes the maps didn't show. Last winter, he'd vanished trying to prove it. Most folks figured the canyon had claimed another fool. She found Morrison's cabin abandoned, door hanging off its hinges like a broken jaw. Inside, beneath a pile of moldy blankets and empty whiskey bottles, she discovered his hand-drawn map. The parchment felt fragile between her fingers, marked with symbols she couldn't read, and warnings written in Morrison's cramped handwriting. "Devil's teeth bite deep here," read one notation. "Water runs red when shadows dance," said another. The route could cut her journey to under a day, if she survived it. Standing in Millbrook Cemetery that evening, Sarah Beth counted 15 fresh graves. 3 more children had died while she'd been searching Morrison's cabin. The Hendersons' boy, barely 7, the blacksmith's twin daughters. Each wooden marker represented parents who'd never hear their children's laughter again. Emma babbled in her arms, healthy and strong, carrying salvation in her tiny veins. The choice crystallized in Sarah Beth's mind like frost on winter glass. She'd attempt the crossing at dawn, following a dead man's map through a canyon that had swallowed countless others. because sometimes the only way forward is straight through the heart of danger itself. Dawn broke like a wound across the eastern mountains when Sarah Beth slipped from her cabin, Emma bundled against her chest in layers of wool and desperation. The streets of Millbrook lay empty, except for the occasional figure moving between houses like ghosts tending to their haunted business. She decided to take the back trails to avoid the main thoroughfares where grieving families might spot her leaving with the one healthy child in town. Her husband's mare, Bella, stood ready in the small stable behind their cabin. The horse had seen better days, but she was sturdy and sure-footed, qualities that mattered more than speed where they were heading. Sarah Beth secured Emma in a makeshift sling across her chest, checking the knots 3 times. Morrison's map went into her coat pocket, along with dried beef, hardtack, and a letter she'd written to Dr. Webb explaining Emma's condition. The initial descent into Devil's Canyon followed what Morrison had marked as the Widow's Walk, a narrow ledge trail that hugged the canyon wall like a desperate embrace. Sarah Beth understood why he'd chosen that name. The path was barely wide enough for a horse, with loose shale that shifted underfoot like ball bearings on polished wood. 20 minutes in, Emma started fussing. The baby's cries echoed off the canyon walls, creating a chorus of infant distress that made Bella's ears flatten nervously. Sarah Beth had to dismount, leading the horse by hand while trying to soothe Emma with soft humming. Each step required calculation. Each footfall was a small gamble with gravity. The rocks below looked hungry. Morrison's first marker appeared an hour later, a cairn of stacked stones with a black crow feather wedged between them. His map notation read, "Where shadows dance, demons feast." Sarah Beth studied the canyon walls, noting how the morning light created shifting patterns across the rock face. Loose stones dotted the slope above, held in place by morning frost that would melt as the sun climbed higher. She'd have to time this section perfectly before the heat turned those shadows into avalanche triggers. Leading Bella through the shadow zone, Sarah Beth felt pebbles rain down like warnings. A chunk of sandstone the size of her fist crashed into the path 10 feet behind them. Emma chose that moment to laugh, actually laugh at the echoing sound. The kid had no idea they were dancing on the edge of oblivion. But here's what Morrison's map couldn't prepare her for: the physical toll of extreme terrain on a body already weakened by weeks of worry and poor sleep. Sarah Beth's hands began bleeding within the first 2 hours from gripping reins and rough rock. Her legs cramped from the constant tension of balancing on narrow ledges. The worst part? Dehydration crept up like a pickpocket, stealing her energy sip by sip. She needed water to produce milk for Emma. Emma needed milk to stay healthy, and they both needed to reach Dr. Webb while the baby's antibodies remained strong enough to matter. The mathematics of survival never added up neatly. Dark clouds began gathering around midday, turning the canyon into a wind tunnel that threatened to blow them clean off the ledge. Sarah Beth found shelter in a shallow cave, but rising water from the sudden downpour forced them back onto the exposed trail during the worst of the weather. Rain turned the already treacherous path into a skating rink made of mud and terror. Emma cried through most of the storm, her small body shivering despite the layers of protection. Sarah Beth pressed herself against the canyon wall, feeling water pour down her back while she tried to shield her daughter from the worst of it. Lightning illuminated the chasm below in stark, terrible detail. She could see the bones of animals that had made similar miscalculations scattered on the rocks like dice thrown by an angry god. During a brief lull in the storm, doubt crept in like cold water through her boots. Was she being heroic or just catastrophically stupid? Emma seemed more fragile in this harsh environment, her small face pale against the violent backdrop of stone and sky. What if Sarah Beth was risking her daughter's life for nothing more than the slim chance of saving others? The faces of dying children back in Millbrook answered that question. The Henderson boy's mother had held his hand as fever consumed him. The blacksmith's wife had sung lullabies to daughters who couldn't hear them anymore. Those parents would have traded anything, their homes, their lives, their souls, for the chance Sarah Beth was taking now. But intentions don't soften hard landings. Halfway through the journey, disaster struck in the form of Morrison's own mortality. Water damage had destroyed a crucial section of the map, leaving nothing but brown stains where the final approach to Dr. Webb's location should have been. Sarah Beth stared at the ruined parchment, feeling her last connection to safe passage dissolve like sugar in rain. She'd have to navigate by instinct now, following the canyon's natural contours and hoping her choices led toward salvation rather than deeper into the wilderness. Morrison had died attempting this crossing. His bones might be down there with the animals, picked clean by scavengers and time. As darkness fell, Emma developed concerning symptoms. Not cholera, but the kind of exhaustion that comes from too much stress on a small system. Her breathing became shallow. Her skin felt clammy despite the layers of clothing. Sarah Beth faced an impossible choice: stop and risk arriving too late to save anyone, or continue in darkness when every step could send them tumbling into the abyss. She chose to keep moving, trusting moonlight and maternal instinct over safety and common sense. The night descent tested every assumption Sarah Beth had about her own limits. She dismounted and led Bella by feel, her boots searching for solid ground while Emma dozed fitfully against her chest. The baby's breathing sounded different in the thin mountain air, more labored, less rhythmic. Each time Emma stirred, Sarah Beth's heart hammered with fresh terror. By dawn, exhaustion had become another passenger on their journey, weighing down every decision and clouding every judgment call. Sarah Beth's vision blurred at the edges, her legs shook with fatigue, and her hands had gone numb from gripping the reins. But ahead, the canyon walls began to spread apart like curtains opening on a stage. The final ascent waited for them, a near-vertical climb that represented their only way out of this stone prison. Sarah Beth could see switchback trails carved into the rock face, leading toward what she desperately hoped was Dr. Webb's camp. The path looked impossible for a woman carrying a baby, which meant it was exactly the kind of thing she'd have to make possible anyway. The final ascent rose before me like a stone ladder built by someone who hated climbers. 50 feet of near-vertical rock face, carved with switchbacks that seemed designed more for mountain goats than exhausted mothers carrying babies. My legs shook just looking at it. Emma had been quiet for the past hour. Too quiet, and I couldn't tell if that was good or terrifying. Bella snorted and shook her head at the impossible trail. Smart horse. But we'd come too far to let common sense turn us around now. I started climbing, leading Bella up the first switchback, while Emma's weight pulled at my chest like gravity had gotten personal. 20 feet up, my boots slipped on loose shale. 30 feet up, I had to stop and throw up from exhaustion. 40 feet up, I started seeing spots at the edges of my vision. Then it happened. My legs gave out completely. I collapsed face first into the rocky trail, Emma tumbling from her sling toward the canyon's edge. For one horrible second, I watched my daughter slide toward a 1,000-foot drop while my body refused to respond. Then something primal kicked in, the same force that lets mothers lift cars off their children. I lunged forward, caught Emma's clothing, and pulled us both back from the brink. We lay there gasping, Emma crying, me shaking like a leaf in a hurricane. But we were alive, and that meant we could still climb. Dr. Webb's camp materialized through the morning haze like a mirage made real. Canvas tents, wooden structures, and the blessed sight of smoke rising from cooking fires. I stumbled into the settlement looking like something that had crawled out of hell's basement, which, honestly, wasn't far from the truth. Emma screamed in my arms, probably sensing that we'd finally reached safety. A tall man with graying hair emerged from the largest tent, took one look at us and started shouting for his assistance. Dr. Marcus Webb, I hoped. He looked competent, which was more than I could say for poor Dr. Hartford back home. My baby, I gasped, thrusting the letter at him with trembling hands. The cholera. She survived it. Her blood... Webb read the letter twice before examining Emma with practiced efficiency. He drew a small sample of her blood into a glass vial, disappeared into his laboratory tent for 20 minutes, then emerged with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Your daughter has developed remarkable antibodies," he said carefully, "but creating serum will require multiple blood draws. It's risky for such a young child." The mathematics were brutal. A safe amount of Emma's blood could save maybe a dozen children, but risking more, pushing Emma to her limits, might save all 30 dying kids back in Millbrook. Webb explained the procedures while I held Emma close, feeling her heartbeat against my chest. I thought about the Henderson boy, the blacksmith's twins, all those fresh graves in the cemetery. Then I looked at Emma's trusting face and made the hardest decision of my life. "Take what you need," I whispered, "but keep her safe." Webb worked for 3 hours, drawing blood in careful stages while monitoring Emma's condition. Each vial represented hope for families I might never see again. My daughter grew pale but remained stable, her tiny body giving everything it could to save children she'd never meet. The return journey followed a safer route Webb knew, but even that felt impossible with Emma weakened and my own reserves completely drained. Every mile back toward Millbrook stretched like 10. Every hour meant more potential deaths. But when I finally rode into town as the sun touched the western mountains, the church bells were ringing for evening prayers instead of funerals. Dr. Webb had arrived an hour ahead of me with the serum, and already the dying children were showing signs of improvement. Emma recovered completely within days. The other children followed. And sometimes the only reward you need is knowing that courage, however desperate, can still tip the scales toward life. The return journey followed Webb's safer route, but safer is relative when you're carrying a weakened baby and running on pure stubbornness. Emma had given so much blood that she barely stirred during the ride back. I kept checking her pulse every few minutes, terrified that saving other children might cost me my own daughter. Webb rode ahead with the serum while I followed at a slower pace. Smart man. He knew those vials mattered more than my comfort. Every hour we delayed meant another child might slip away in Millbrook. The mathematics of life and death don't pause for maternal anxiety. By the time I reached town, everything had changed. The church bells rang for evening prayers instead of their constant funeral tolling. Children who'd been dying that morning were sitting up, taking water, asking for their mothers. Webb's serum, created from Emma's blood, was working faster than anyone had dared hope. Mrs. Henderson stopped me in the street, tears streaming down her face. Her boy was asking for soup. The blacksmith's twins were arguing over a toy. The most beautiful sound their parents had heard in weeks. 30 children had been saved by one baby's courage. Emma recovered within days, her natural resilience bouncing back like a rubber ball. She never knew she'd been a hero. To her, it was just another adventure with Mama, complete with interesting sounds and new faces. Sometimes ignorance is the greatest blessing childhood offers. Dr. Hartford shook my hand with trembling fingers. "You did something impossible," he said. "Maybe. Or maybe I just did what any mother would do when faced with choosing between fear and love. The canyon hadn't killed us. Emma's sacrifice had saved lives, and Millbrook's children would grow up to have children of their own." 6 months later, when spring melted the winter snow, someone found Jake Morrison's bones at the bottom of Devil's Canyon. His map had been wrong about several crucial details. We'd survived more by luck than planning, which probably makes the whole thing even more ridiculous. But here's what I learned on those canyon walls. Sometimes the most reckless thing you can do is exactly the right thing. Emma's antibodies saved 30 lives. Her courage, borrowed from mine, or maybe mine borrowed from hers, proved that ordinary people can accomplish extraordinary things when love outweighs fear. The children of Millbrook lived. That's all the heroism any story needs.